Hello, and welcome to Exploring Axon, a podcast where we discuss Axon Framework, Axon Server, and their ecosystem. I am your host and a software developer at AxonIQ, Sarah Torrey. In this episode, I spoke with Ben Runchey, one of our solutions engineers here at AxonIQ. In his previous project, Ben went from using various tools such as Mongodb, RabbitMQ, SNS, and SQS in his systems to using Axon Framework and Axon Server as the messaging platform, event store, and more. We talked about the challenges and the benefits of making this decision. We also discussed scalability, monitoring, planning, education, and much more. I hope you enjoyed this talk, and let's have a listen. Hi, Ben. How are you today? Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi. Great. Doing well.
So Ben, I know we talked before about the Axon initializer a few episodes ago, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are, your background, education, work, and where you are now?
Yeah. So I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, United States, obviously. I graduated college in 1996. Or I suppose university is where I was. I went to a university. I had a degree in telecommunications and then a minor in computer science. When I got there, I would never have guessed that's what I would have gone to school for, but it ended up working out. And then kind of got lucky that I found all this interesting, because then graduating at that time, that was kind of the beginning of all of what would have been the .com boom at that time.
Exactly.
And it's just so... It's has worked out to be a pretty good career in terms of no end to the number of job opportunities and interesting problems and things like that I've been able to solve.
Absolutely. So, timing was great. Yeah.
So I started off working heavily in the Microsoft stack for probably the first 15, maybe almost 20 years. No, 15 years of my career. And then probably I want to say it was 2010, 2011. When so much of the world got into front-end frameworks. I think that really changed things for Microsoft developers, because you weren't writing just for the desktop or for the backend. It was the web browser, and having those frameworks really opened up, I think, open source. And that's kind of how I started to get into other things as well at that point. So that got me into jQuery, and then into Angular at that point. And then when I was working on an Angular app, we used Java as the back end. That was just right before Spring Boot.
Okay.
So I went back to .NET for a couple years, and then during that time, again, Microsoft made the choice of moving from .NET only running on Windows to running on everything. Right. Well, again, that was another big shift in my world.
Yeah.
So that opened up all these other OSs that I hadn't really had as much experience with.
Right.
And then Docker came out. So I would say that all those things kind of pushed me away opened a lot of doors to be able to easily go over to another ecosystem, and ended up in Java for the most part here over the last 4 or 5 years. So
that's really cool. And I love doing these talks, because now I learned something that I didn't know about you. I had no idea that you did do front end, and I had no idea that
it wasn't heavy front end
4 or 5 years ago.
That was about
but still, I don't know why I always assumed you've been in the Java world since, I don't know, the beginning, but that's really great.
Yeah. So then when I got back to Spring Boot was there, and that really that was an eye opener in terms of how easy they had made it to build services at that point. And then in terms of the whole event sourcing thing, that was something I had been interested in for many, many years, the whole idea of events and then event sourcing. But in the .NET side of the world, there really weren't and aren't many things in the way of frameworks.
Sure.
So you had to roll a lot of your own stuff. So when I got over to the Java side and found Axon Framework, to be able to do so many things. It was like pixie dust, as Allard kind of jokes about, But yeah, I mean,
without the pixie dust.
Without the pixie dust, pixie dust without it. But that made it a lot easier to do all the things I wanted to do, and more than that, as an architect, you are always trying to find ways to enable a team to be able to build out a certain architecture so you can get the advantages you're looking for out of
Of
it.
course, as fast as possible and as
This,
easily as possible.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that really made it a lot easier for people to come on board, understand what was come up to speed on it.
Right.
Whereas if it had been like maybe a homegrown our own rolled one, then it turns not just into needing to understand the business logic and how do we use a framework to manage it. It turns into, okay, how do we fix the bugs in our framework that
Exactly.
manages it? And then that
Yeah.
starts to become, more time consuming.
Much more of a project that you wanted to sign up for ever.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. So,
Right.
yeah.
So you mentioned a couple of things that I want to ask you about. So, firstly, you talked about event sourcing and how you became interested in that several years ago. So, can you tell me a little bit about that? And was that sort of in conjunction with microservices, or was it something totally different?
Yeah. I would say so. I first became interested in events. It would have been in the mid 2000s. I was
Okay.
working on a lot of integration projects. The idea was that at places I worked, you'd buy the best of breed. So I was working at a online education company,
Okay.
and so we had a different app for running classes than we had for the registrar's office, than we had for the finance group, to pay or for people to pay, and just all those things. So we wanted to integrate these so that when something happened in one, it would be able to go talk to the other one,
Right.
one of those other core systems. So we used, at the time, it was a product called, it still is out there, BizTalk. So that's just an integration product on the Microsoft stack. And so everything there was an event. So I really like this idea of, wow, we're decoupled. We can put something in a queue. That makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
And the value of the event of, hey, I can archive that. I can see what went on over time. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And then over time, one of the big things that I find most interesting to work on are just, the way businesses operate with one another is it's a series of interactions typically that, maybe a person probably can do if they have the spreadsheet and someone else on the other end of the phone is able to do it. But being able to automate that and keep track of what's gone on, those types of things. So those are all events or message, some level of messaging. So that's kind of where it got started. And then, but every system that I ever worked on that was more following the historical layered architecture, read your record, modify it, store it, you were always faced with the challenge of, how do I get events out of that so that I can actually do something to respond, So there is kind of that bridge where when I remember reading about event sourcing, I think it was probably in 2011 or something like that, maybe 2012 the first time.
Okay.
And I thought, well, gosh, if we could get that, or I could find some way to involve that with what I'm working on, this would solve a huge problem for me. I'd have my event here ready to go. The frame, the system itself would be built around this idea, and it wouldn't have to be this extra piece that you're, cobbling on to the end of a transaction against the database. It would just be the transaction in of itself. So that's kind of how I got to or met events, got to love them, and then found my way to event sourcing in terms of like, gosh, I just feel like that's going to solve so many problems for us from an architectural standpoint.
Yeah, and it sounds like in a way you were already using microservices because you are working with different systems, and each system is taking care of something specific, such as payment or keeping track of certain things for you, and then in between you're talking to these different systems that are doing their own things.
Yep.
But then you unifying them in a way. That's really, really fascinating and cool stuff. So you talked about you as an architect, and did you start your career as an architect, or were you working more as a software developer and then kind of shifted your interest into becoming an architect? Did that switch, if there was a switch, happen sort of naturally, or was it something in between that got you really interested in the architecture or the architectural aspect of it, I guess?
Yeah, I think. Well, I started just like anybody out of college. I just had a job. I was like, yeah, I'm working.
Making money.
Exactly. Isn't that what it?
I can't pay for my own beer.
Yeah. Um, so that's how so I started off just writing software,
Mm-hmm.
and working as I'll call it just a junior software engineer or associate software engineer at I guess you'd call them a consulting company around
Mm-hmm.
Minneapolis here,
Mm-hmm.
and just got more interested, and the path to being an architect kind of just evolved down it. I
Mm-hmm.
evolved to that.
Yeah.
I think I always kind of thought, well, hey, that sounds like an interesting job because you're doing a little bit more of the planning and trying to figure out, okay, how do we want to solve this
Yeah.
ahead of time? And I had worked at a company named Magenic
Mm-hmm.
Technologies that had just my goal is to never be the smartest person in the room. So there, I was probably one of the dumbest,
Oh no.
which is great
Which is
because
a good thing because you learn a lot, right?
I got a chance to learn a ton of
Yeah.
things from a lot of different people, and see what meant to be an architect, And while I was there, that was always this thing. I think everybody wanted to be an architect, but the big challenge is, uh, it's just it's just not in the wheelhouse of everybody to
Mm-hmm.
move from thinking about, or let's say this, what kind of an architect could you become?
Yeah.
Some people are very good at the real detail of the software, how it's put
Mm-hmm.
together, things like that. Then there's other levels of architect that are more, okay, how can I take what the business needs are, model it out? Maybe
Yeah.
they don't have the same level of interest in, hey, how does the web server handle all the requests
More
and
the nitty gritty stuff.
yeah, the
Yeah.
nitty gritty, more of the
Yeah.
technical to application to domain architect, that type of thing. So I think my strength lies more in the application
Mm-hmm.
domain side.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can do the other side, but when you really work with somebody who does that, like, okay, every request is gonna be so big, and they can determine how much bandwidth they need and what type of CPU and memory to make the system run under what load. It's pretty impressive because my brain just starts like being
It's
overwhelmed
really
at that. Yeah,
micromanaging in that
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas
Right.
I really enjoy more the side of, hey, how does this business? What are the entities or
Mm.
concepts that make the business run? Kind of back to that, the whole Eric Evans domain driven
DDD kind of
design.
concept. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
that's really what keeps drawing me into software is that side
Right.
of thing, and
Yeah,
knowing
more
that I
high
need.
level things and what
Yeah,
actually matters to the business as opposed to
yeah,
all
and
of the
and
details.
yeah, and all these things like Axon Framework, Java,
Hmm.
whatever have you. Those are the tools I'm using to help apply it. But
Yeah.
it, and I enjoy them. But it's the
The end goal
yeah
is, yeah,
is
is
getting
what you're
something done for
interested
the
in, which
business.
is, yeah,
Yes,
which is the business question in hand, right?
yes.
And that's what we focus with the domain driven design, which is really great. So I wanted to talk to you today specifically about one of your previous projects that you had done prior to joining Axonic, which was basically moving from the sort of more legacy monolith system that you were working with into microservices, and more specifically your interest in moving from some of the other services that you were using at the time, or tools for that matter, like MongoDB or RabbitMQ, into Axon Server, and sort of that process, and the not just the technical aspect of it, but also the like you mentioned, what you're interested in, which is the decision making of it, or how to get there because the business requires it or demands it. So let's talk a little bit about that. So tell everybody a little bit about this project that you were working on. I believe it was in healthcare,
Yep.
and you had a lot of different parts that had to talk to each other. But yeah, just walk me through that process.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I was working for a healthcare or a company that operates in the healthcare space.
Mm-hmm.
We would work on behalf of insurance companies for the most part. That's how it was kind of born out of insurance companies who sell
Mm-hmm.
Medicaid policies.
Yeah.
They are required by law to go talk to whoever they've sold this to. So they can't
Yeah.
just go take the government's money and not worry about how the people that have signed up to use their plan with
Absolutely.
government dollars, how they're doing. So every year they have to outreach to them and ask them a series of questions of have you been in the hospital? How many times have you fallen in the last year? Things like that. Because some people are new to the plan.
Mm-hmm.
Other people, maybe something's happened. And if you've ever been, everybody's been involved in the healthcare system in the US. If you're here, sometimes a claim can take a really long time to be figured out. So a company may not really even know what they have on their hands all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's how it started. That was the government mandate. And the company I worked for, they said they just took this on behalf of a few insurance companies to do this. Well, they decided, because previous to that, these insurance companies were just hiring, office full of people to call their the members. Well, that's obviously a very cost prohibitive approach to solving this problem. So the man who started this company was really big on interactive voice to calling people, which unfortunately is also used for the dreaded spam call or the robocall.
Exactly.
But we were trying very hard to not come across like that.
Yeah,
is what it is. But that's
so you don't sound like you're selling an island to me.
Exactly.
Or
yeah. You didn't just win a cruise or something like that. Yes. So yeah. So there were a few different aspects to this. So we would, we get something from the insurance company saying, hey, here's the people we have. We need you to talk to them. And then we would, the government mandates you talk to them within a certain period of time. We would call them. If that didn't work, we would send them a piece of paper, basically a questionnaire in the mail, hoping they would send it in.
Right.
Sometimes we would do that first and then call them, because hoping that, hey, maybe they'll see this and our call will make them fill it out and send it back to us. So that was really the idea. As texting and email became much more options, cost-effective options to do the things with, we really wanted people to come to our website to do it. And so that's really how, right there is the big shift of going from this old monolithic system that was based on the Microsoft stack and, used .NET, Windows, and SQL Server and IIS to get everything done, to us saying, okay, well, gosh. And then when you got in there and took a look at it, you're like, well, we want to do all these different channels now. Yeah. So, and the way that it had been built was that, calling someone was baked right into the middle of the system. Like being able to plug in something else could be done. And we did do it over there, but to be able to scale them independently, because texting and email is a different interaction model and throughput model than what making a phone call is.
Right.
That's where we were like, we really need to start breaking this apart, because, A, it's going to let us scale at the rate we want. And then B, we're going to be able to start choosing the right technologies for the job here.
Exactly.
That was the other thing for us.
And
we also, I was going to say, we wanted to leave. We were on a hosted system. We wanted to be able to run more at Amazon and be able to take advantage of a few things there as well. So those were some of the impetus, because, for us to scale up took somebody, hey, could you do that for us? Could you get us another server? And it'd be like 30 days for the server to show up.
Oh my God.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting, because what you mentioned is that in the business aspect of it too, you're moving from a more legacy old way of doing things, and sort of if you would, monolithic way of doing it, because you're basically moving from a call center and mailman basically handing letters to people into something that's much more technology driven, like sending text messages or emails or using automated calls. As much as we all don't like them, it makes life so much easier, because then you don't have to have individual human beings being on the phone calling people. I mean, you do have that also, but a lot fewer number of people who are in charge of that. So that's really cool, because you can see it, how that happens in the business side of things, moving into more in a way microservices, right? Because now you're using different technologies and different ways of doing it, and also in your systems you had to go through that as well, which is really cool. So one of the things that you had mentioned in a previous talk that you actually did for an AxonIQ conference a couple of years ago was that there was no real domain model that was focusing on these business requirements, and that's why you had to make that shift. And also that there was a shared database with a lot of tables that were coupled to each other. There was no sort of decoupling going on, and therefore you couldn't really scale because everything was just connected and interwoven, right, with one another. And also you didn't have automation. So these are all of the things that you wanted to move away from, and in order to be able to grow the company. So some of the tools that you were using at the time were MongoDB and RabbitMQ. So can you talk a little bit about those for some of the listeners who may not know what they are? So can you tell us a little bit about MongoDB and what you use it for, as well as RabbitMQ?
Yeah. So, the original system, like we said, it was all based on using this one database, SQL Server, at the time. And we didn't really have the concept of things being autonomous,
Mm-hmm.
like a whole service that could stand up or go down on its own, and get messages from something else of, hey, I need you to do this for me, like e.g. a command message, type of thing. So that's really what we started to
Yeah.
use as we broke things apart. We were using RabbitMQ to be able to deliver those commands from one system to the other, saying, hey, I need this done, and then a subsequent event coming back. So we had started with the command and event model right there with that over RabbitMQ as our way of decoupling things. So
Mm-hmm.
systems didn't have to know who was consuming it and who was saying it happened. They didn't care. They just put it out there, knew it was going to get taken care of, and then be able to handle the response. And then on the flip side, the database, we really wanted to move. One of the big things was, well, we were starting this out and we were really like, okay, do we stay with a relational database here, or do we take
Mm-hmm.
this opportunity to look into a document database or some NoSQL database and see what it could offer for us? And we ended up choosing Mongo just because of the ease of how it fit into the development model. You just
Mm-hmm.
read something and it would read the whole graph out for you and
Yeah.
then store it for you,
Right.
versus maybe like a key store or anything like the key value store, something like that might
Yeah.
be a little bit different. That end, we could put indexes on damn near anything we wanted. I'm not saying it's
Exactly.
always smart, but you can
Yeah.
do it, and
But
it
then it's
because
so easy to find things and parse things
yes,
out. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the other options that were out there in the document space, namely, why can't I think of there's a big Amazon one, their NoSQL database. It'll come to me in a minute here, but
Yeah.
that one I could only have one index on it at a
Mm-hmm.
time.
Right.
And so that was really the big deciding, because we didn't know what we were going to be querying on ahead of time or not. So we felt like it was giving us more flexibility. So that's how we got to those two in terms of deciding on those technologies as we were moving away from the original stack that we were working on. So, and because then the whole idea as well was give each service their own database so they could
Mm-hmm.
live on their own and scale independently at that point. So
So, but
when
was it
needed.
easy to scale to the level that you wanted to with Mongo?
Yeah, so when we first started, so we had to adhere to a lot of health, let's say, security constraints,
Mm-hmm.
HIPAA in the
HIPAA.
United
Yeah.
States here.
Yeah.
So at
So for
first,
those of you outside of the States, this is just a
Health Information Privacy and Portability Act is what I
now
believe it
there you go.
stands
I'm
for. Yeah.
sorry.
Yep. No,
It's
that's fine.
exactly.
It's yeah. I just always think of a big hippopotamus when I say
It
the
really does
acronym.
feel like a big hippopotamus, doesn't
Yes,
it?
it is.
Because it's
Yes,
such a big deal.
it is.
Yeah. So you have to adhere by
Yeah.
this. You have to just
So we had to
yeah.
adhere to that,
Everything's very
and
yeah.
when we first started going down this path, not a lot of things at Amazon were on their HIPAA certified list.
Right.
So the main thing that was EC2 instances,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
at the time, and also, Mongo, their hosted service was not yet HIPAA compliant.
Yeah.
So we just ran our own version, our own instances of it,
Mm-hmm.
and that worked to start. But that was where we really quickly realized, wow, we suck at really running things at scale here.
This is not
Um,
gonna work out. Yeah.
yeah, and thank God they were able to to get certified in that period of time, and we worked out whatever legalese, and we were able to move over to their Atlas service,
Mhm.
which, man, I mean, made it easy. You need a bigger instance, you click a button, you hit go, and it would be no downtime.
Mhm.
You would just roll out a bigger instance of it, or you need more disk
Nice.
space, or all those types of things. So that's really how we were able to scale quite easily with it. The system
Mhm.
itself handles it no problem.
Right.
Yeah, for us, that was the biggest issue of us
Mhm.
just planning what made the most sense
Right.
in terms of the again, back to that whole hardware sought disk thing that
Yeah.
I talked about, that I kind of get forced to do, but don't really feel
Mhm.
all that comfortable
Right.
saying that. Yeah, I think I did this 100% right, type of thing.
Right.
But they made it very easy. You could just move the slider and it would move it up or move it down. So
Yeah.
so that was it. And then we ran our own instances of Rabbit at the
Mhm.
time for the
Mhm.
same reason. Um,
Okay.
and because what we had started off with was, again, wanting to use SQS at Amazon, but that wasn't on
Mhm.
the HIPAA list either. So we had to do
Right.
this ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, and we even there, we looked to, I think it was called Cloud AMQP.
Mhm.
But again, they were more focused at the time on the right to be forgotten laws in Europe,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
as because
Yeah.
they're being forced to handle that
Right.
a period of time, um, and so we never got around to running with them with
Right.
it.
Right.
So yeah,
So then you have a lot of different parts that you had to sort of coordinate together in order to be able to really um, move in the direction that you wanted to, which was ultimately being able to scale up your business and capabilities of the business as the requirements were changing.
yeah. Um, so I think that's really where, when we got there and started talking about it, and so we had a
Yeah.
lot of knowledge about how the business worked, but
Right.
we had never really put it together. Like, other than people kind of talking, we had a few terms that would get
Hmm.
used a lot, but you would never really see them front and center in the software
Yeah.
or in how things had gotten put together. Because it was always like, hey, I've got an idea, and then they'd do it, or they'd put together some concept of it, and then all of a sudden that would become the system. And so knowing how to support it, or the next person coming along, well, what does this mean?
It's like a
Because
surprise,
it
right?
was, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's really where the whole domain modeling aspect came into play, to be able to, okay, well, hey, we broke things down into some bounding contexts. As I said
Hmm.
before,
Yeah.
we had to take files in, so that was one area of the
Hmm.
system. Deciding who to talk to, when, all those types of things.
Right.
That was another set of the system. Um, Actually executing on who to talk to when, that was
Oh yeah.
another area. And then the channel, we called them channels, so that would be
Hmm.
like calling someone using the automated voice,
Hmm.
text, email. And then we had another channel. I think when people think of channel, they always think of something going out, but
Yeah.
you can have a one-way channel, or you can have a two-way channel,
Two ways. Right.
or it's an inbound. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of the final channels was web, and that's
Hmm.
typically what we use the email and uh, SMS for, or text, was saying,
Hmm.
hey, why don't you come over to our website and take this survey that we need you to take for
You
your
are
new
mandated to
policy.
take. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was really those were other services we had that
Hmm.
we could, again, build and scale independently, excuse me,
Yeah.
of one another.
Yeah.
So and each one of them, we were able to uh, some uh, some we could get right away to use event sourcing,
Hmm.
because I think we really understood the concept of it well, or not understood the concepts we were modeling really well.
Hmm. Right.
Others of them we did not. Uh,
Hmm.
for as much as we had people who knew how to make IVR systems, we had never really looked at it as its own domain. Like, okay, well, what am
Right.
I doing here? I'm making a phone call. I'm doing, this thing. And text and email was the same thing.
Yeah.
So we had these systems, but we didn't really bite off things from a domain model perspective in
Hmm.
those.
Hmm.
They were almost more prototypes when we first brought them up.
Okay.
Whereas the area that defined, hey, what are we trying to talk to people about, and driving it, those are two areas that we were able to right away move over to event sourcing
Yeah. Which
in
is
the new iteration that we were building.
right.
So
Right. So you did talk about sort of one person coming in and sort of building a system, right, on their own, and it would be a little bit of a surprise. So I want to ask you a little bit about the planning portion of this basically migration from old to new, did you obviously you had some people on board in your team that they wanted to use event sourcing, and they were okay with this process, and they just came along with it, and did the whole going into a bit more of a microservices and also using event sourcing in that sense. But was it a difficult transition for the rest of the team? Was the whole team sort of on board to go along with it from the get-go? Did you have planning sessions? Did you have to do anything like event storming or modeling or anything like that before you decided what tools you wanted to use? Or was it kind of like a process of elimination or trial and error? Let's use something, and if it doesn't work, use something different. Yeah.
Well, I think it was a little bit of
Everything.
well, possibly, yeah. So I had in my mind, events are the center to everything we do. I don't know that everybody else realized that. Mm-hmm. So getting them to slow down enough and realize, well, a file arrived. That's an event. I take an action off of that. That's my command. Yeah. The subsequent command that would happen. I make it's time to call somebody. That's an event. Type of thing. But because I think there's still a lot of people that they just think the world is batch jobs and wake up, read everything from a table. Okay, do all those things. The idea that you'd raise an event and do things asynchronously and wait for a response is new. So I think there was some learning curve on it from that standpoint.
Okay.
And then, but there was a large number of people there was like 4 of us. So me and another guy,
so half the team agreed.
Yeah, the other team, right away we're like, oh, this is an event type thing, and that's where we wanted to decouple our services. Mm-hmm. And that's where I started even thinking at the time, I'm like, this is event sourcing, but I don't know if I can sell that right now, just right as a stance.
Let them figure it out on their own.
Yeah. So that's where we decided to partner with a development team out of Bulgaria.
Okay.
And, so it was kind of nice because I could say, hey, could you take a look at this for me? And they would overnight go work on something and come back and say, oh, yeah, hey, you wanted us to look at that. Here's what it is. Yeah. So it was a lot easier for me to have somebody go out and do some exploratory work, come back the next day, and we could just, as a team, talk about it. They could say, yeah, here's what I found. And it was a way to kind of, for the people there that were working with me in Minneapolis, to see things, but it wasn't coming from
you specifically.
The leader. Yes. It was, hey, somebody else.
What you did there.
Yeah. Kind of, hey, it's an idea. See what it can do. And then when they come back and see it, that with the conversation that would ensue wasn't somebody feeling like they had to agree with my architecture. It was give us your feedback on what you think this is. And then I could get about ideas like, hey, I think this would be great for handling this, this, and this. Yeah. And so that's really how we ended up getting there. Yeah. So, and then that's how Axon Framework came in to be, like I said, in terms of a big centerpiece to our architecture over time. So,
and you experimented with Axon Framework because, obviously you wanted to be able to have an easier way of using events and commands and, messaging basically do most of the work for you. But then at one point you decided to use Axon Server when Axon Server became available. Yep. So where did that decision come from, and why did you decide to move away again from Mongo, which is a no relational database, back into relational database?
Well, not back into, but no, we just went right to Axon Server.
Okay.
When that opportunity arose. So yeah, when we started, it was 2017, early 2018. And I had met Allard at a training he was giving in Denver. So myself and another man flew down to Denver and went through the training there. And that was great. And talking to Allard, this was back when they had, was it Axonic? I assume it was. Yes, I'm trying to think exactly.
Axonic existed at that point. Yeah,
and there was Hubs and Axon DB. And Hubs was a way of distributing your events to people. It kind of to take away or give you an more out of the box solution versus, Kafka or Rabbit or whatever you might have been using to try to distribute events if you wanted to take that approach. And then Axon DB, which is really the precursor to Axon Server right now, and the event store that it provides.
Right.
We had looked at that and decided that at the time we were okay with MongoDB in terms of how things were performing, and also because we would have had to run it ourselves at the time, which we were still very much in the like, oh, one more thing for us to run, type of thing. Right. It's like, if I can keep it down, okay, I only have to know about, Mongo and Rabbit at this point and whatnot, in terms of keeping it up and running and monitoring things, that type of thing. So that was another reason why we kind of backed away from it this is in 2018. Yeah. Well, then, as we were going to write a couple so we started to use our system quite a bit, and the number of events and adding events as we grew and added more functionality, that type of thing. So the amount of data that we were starting to put into MongoDB was starting to become quite prohibitive. Yes, it was humongous, as since Mongo is like short for humongous, maybe. Right. It was getting to be a lot. I mean, our domain events collection, I think at one point had 250 million documents in it. Wow. So we would see some performance degradation. So we had to start cleaning it out a little bit. But the point of it is, we were all running all of our databases on one very large Mongo cluster and a replica set, 3-node replica set. And it was working, but we just kept having to scale up and up. And we were noticing that, not noticing, it's not like it was new, but the paradigm of doing subscribing events versus publishing puts a pretty big load on whatever database you're pulling. Right. So our database would, you could see this domain events collection being the biggest thing as it got bigger and bigger and whatnot. Yeah. But when we wanted to write other systems with using event sourcing, we're like, okay, is this gonna work in terms of using Mongo? It's just not. So that's where we called up Axonic at the time and said, okay, let's take a look at what this is, and we'd like to try it. And so when we went and were rewriting a couple of those channel services, which were the IVR, SMS, email type services, we started with IVR. And that's where that was the first one to run on Axon Server. And everyone after that ran on Axon Server as well. And we just saw much better performance out of those for being able to work with it. MongoDB definitely got us up and running. But in terms of once we got the documents or the collection so big, the disk I/O on it and everything just started to become very difficult to keep the performance. And then one of the other challenges, with a document store is there's nothing in there inherent to the document structure itself. Like, they don't have like a sequence or something like that would be in a relational database or identity column, maybe you'd call it. But sequences being probably the better approach. They don't have anything like that, or Mongo itself doesn't at the time with the one we were running on. This is 3.x something. And so that starts to become an issue too. We had to increase our look back window as we were polling for events to say, hey, don't go just look a second, go look 2 seconds ago. 2 seconds ago. Because it could take it a while to write it and we could miss it by milliseconds. And because it wasn't just keeping track of things in an event stream in terms of like a token that was like an identifier. Right. It was keeping track of it in terms of the timestamp. So, and at the time, I can't remember what it was, but when we would write out an event to Mongo, it would be down to three digit into the thousandths of milliseconds. Well, we needed it more precise than that to be able to not miss stuff.
I see. Yeah.
And that's what we did get to that. And I'll get to that in a little bit. So that was another nuance that was causing some problems for us as we were putting more and more and more data into MongoDB as our event store. So
right. Yeah. That's really cool. So one of the reasons you also decided to use Axon Server was the fact that it's location transparent. And
Yep.
why was that important to you?
Yeah, there was a couple things there. Number
Hmm.
one, we didn't, you know, we wanted to make it so that services could get data from other services when
Right.
necessary. Like, hey, I don't need this all the time, but I need it sometime. So the whole
Hmm.
query bus concept really is what started started us down the path of saying, hey, I'd love to just publish a query request. It gets picked up, handled, and sent back to us. And
Yeah.
I don't have to know how to find you. I don't have to know how to authenticate against you.
Right.
We don't have to have all sorts of security set up in different systems,
Yeah.
or even using the we were using Auth0 for a little of our other front end security,
Hmm.
but we were like, okay, I don't want to have to bite that off just to make this call. So it made it real easy from that standpoint to do that because the other thing is the moment you expose an endpoint uh, on a service, you have to make
Hmm.
sure there's some level. Okay, how are we making sure the outside world doesn't find out about this thing?
Exactly. Talk about HIPAA
And
and security
yeah,
and everything.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that was another real easy way for us to be able to achieve that goal
Hmm.
and not have to open another door
Right.
that we had to make sure had a good lock on it and everything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and as we were moving around from just different, during that time we went from running on Docker Swarm
Hmm.
to running on AWS Fargate, and then we also had some things on EC2 instances. So not having to know
Wow.
how to find all those things,
Yeah.
or just we could move them from one to another. They just go down and come back up, and be able to handle their query requests, or they could make a query
Hmm.
request. That was made it real easy to
That's really
handle that
great.
type of a leap. Yeah.
Yeah. So did Axon Server then replace almost all of the other tools that you were using?
So we still continue to use. We moved away from Rabbit and we
Hmm.
used SNS and SQS at Amazon for
Hmm.
some parts of things. Um, we started to use our plan uh, was to use Axon Server because
Hmm.
the biggest challenge we ran into was in terms of getting it there was okay. We need to have event sourcing be the underpinning of these different services. So
Sure.
that was really the thing that we couldn't get to that until we
Hmm.
decided to go and attack that service and make it event sourced.
Yeah.
Once we had made a service event sourced, that opened the door for us to start doing this. Um, we had that between I want to say 3 or 4 services where Axon and the event store uh, was the backbone.
Hmm.
A few of the other ones, uh, just even though things are new, 2 years old, you still end up building something against it, and then it's
Right.
like, oh my gosh, if I change that, I got to change these 5 things at the same time, and
Yeah.
so you're wondering how you can break that, how you can make that
Hmm.
happen. Um, but we were able to at least start putting together a plan that would be, hey, this is how it looks. Here's how we're going to get there. What does it
Hmm.
take? And be able to articulate that back to a product owner from a technical, like, hey, here's the level of effort and here's the value we get out of it
Yeah.
to get there. But it just was going to take a little more time. But we had started down that path of using Axon Server as the
Hmm.
messaging backbone for pretty much everything we were doing going forward at some point in time.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
we still had legacy or other things that we wanted to move over to event sourcing, and once we would have done that, they would have joined in on that as well.
On the
So,
Axon
but
Server. Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I guess
yep,
because ultimately a lot of things are business decision, right? If it makes sense with business, then you can obviously
yeah, yep,
turn the wheels. Otherwise, it just it
yeah.
takes a little bit longer.
And
Yeah.
from a perspective of how many things we had to manage, moving parts, things like that.
Yeah.
The fewer moving parts we can get to,
The
the better.
better. Absolutely.
We can manage just that versus many other
Because you
things.
know how
And
many things can go wrong at all times. If you have fewer things to have to keep
yes,
an eye on, it's
yeah,
a lot easier to just having
exactly,
to manage 5 or 6 different tools and services. So
yeah.
that's really cool. So, um, in the end, did you feel that was the right move for your particular case? Were you happy with the end result? Was it something that you felt like, oh, this is really lacking and I'd like to see some improvement in it. And obviously you've been working with Axon Framework and Axon Server since then, so you know what improvements have been made.
Yeah.
But at the end, was it a
You
good
know,
decision for you?
I think it was. I think some of the biggest challenges we faced at the time were, um, you know, just some things in the framework didn't make it quite as easy to have one context be subscribing to events from another context, or we're using the query bus from another one. But there've been some features added to the framework that have handled that.
Mm-hmm.
We also had, the side of the house that put together a lot of our analytics.
Yeah.
They loved Python. They still do. So again, that's one of the things, one of the long-term goals we have of adding more clients. But even
Right.
there, we just had we'd write a Java service, and we would
Mm-hmm.
just take all those events and put them in,
Put them in there.
wherever it is that they
Yeah.
needed it, so they could do their thing until such time that we could, until that type of a feature would have been made available.
Right.
So it wasn't like we had patterns in place. They were easy to implement.
Yeah.
They were so dead simple that you weren't really worried about them once you got them up and running. So
Yeah.
monitoring them was really more, are you running or not? It wasn't, if it was down, that was it. But as long as it was up, it was pretty easy what it was doing to take into place or
Nice.
take into account in terms of our monitoring of it. So,
Yeah.
but
Fantastic.
yeah, I mean, and that gets to another aspect of what we wanted to get in terms of being able, how is the world behaving
Mm-hmm.
with Axon. When we were running Axon with Mongo, being able to tell how long an event was going to take when we would
Mm-hmm.
put it into the event store and take it out, that wasn't something we had a real easy ability to do a metric on to
Yeah.
figure out how fast can that happen. Whereas Axon Server with Prometheus, and then with the Grafana dashboard, yeah, you can see how long, how many commands am I handling? How am I doing this? So that was another, maybe not something that when you sat down and thought about why do I want to use it, it was the top of the line thing.
Right.
But over time, as we needed to understand, hey, what kind of a volume can we really handle with the
Mm-hmm.
hardware we're running on? Do we need more
Right.
hardware, whatever it is? Those tools, or the fact that
Comes
they were
really handy.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
having it there. It's that whole end-to-end thing where the framework is built very, so tight with Axon Server. It made it a lot
Mm-hmm.
easier to tell how long things were taking, what was happening, what was occurring, that type of thing.
Yeah,
When we had
definitely.
MongoDB, that was always a, like,
Vague.
log this, log that, that type, yeah. So
Yeah,
that made
exactly.
it tough. So
Yeah, definitely. And especially when you're growing a business or scaling your systems, that's one of the things that you want to keep an eye on, because metrics are very important. You
mhm.
want to make sure that some things are working, or like you said, if you need additional hardware, memory space, whatever it is that you're looking into, and having it sort of readily available, it's always really
Yeah.
nice, as opposed to having to go dig 5 billion different trenches to
Well,
find
that's what it
what you're
was. It was
looking
stitching
for.
together different log files, because it could be, this microservice over here sent the command
Yeah.
that then, or handled the command that, well, yeah, sent it. This one handled it, and then this one handled the command, and then this one actually handled the other one. A third one handled the event. So yeah, you're stitching together things at that point, and the tracing in Axon framework allows for aspects of this, but it's still, you still got to have something to stitch it all together at the end. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and talk about using different services as opposed to one central one. If you're using RabbitMQ, for example, and you want to sort of have an idea of how your messaging system is working, as opposed to just doing everything on the Axon server side in terms of, yes, these are the number of messages coming and going and so forth, and also as far as the event store part of it goes, you have an idea of how well you're doing. Are we running out of space here, or are we
mhm.
needing anything additional? Whereas MongoDB, that's again a separate service that you have to use alongside, for instance, your RabbitMQ. So
Yeah.
you have two different things to monitor as opposed to just one thing to look at, which is really neat. I'm always, I feel like since I became a parent, I'm always for simple one thing that I can keep an eye on, because I can't
Mhm.
keep an eye on different things. There's like a
Oh yeah.
million things you have to look for anyways, and then
Yeah.
you're just like, if I can just look at one thing and get all of my information and data from that, then that's just going to make my life so much easier. So
Yeah.
that's
I
really
kind of
neat.
say once you become a parent, or at least I feel like I have become professionally dumber for no reason other than my brain only has so much space,
I
and you
call it
start
mom
ramming.
brain.
Yeah, you start ramming kid stuff in there, and it starts taking up some of that professional
Right.
area of it. It's like, got to reallocate it. So,
Now I have to
but
really switch off my mom brain, just
yeah,
really think here, because like I haven't had
load
time
something
to
into
think of
memory to see.
anything.
Yep. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like,
So
where's my central data location at?
that's exactly it.
And
So
just pull all this out. Yeah,
yeah.
this is really cool. So and then obviously I'm hoping at least you liked Axon enough to join us in our team, which is really cool. So just to wrap up a really, really interesting conversation, which if
Well,
it was
there's one
up
more
to me, I would
thing
talk about it more. Yeah, but go
that
ahead.
I
Yeah,
just wanted to say about. So
go for
finally,
it.
that big
Yeah.
service that we in the end we had to, it finally came down to the point that we had to get off of Mongo because the performance was just killing us.
Yeah.
So I worked with Stefan Dragisic,
Mm-hmm.
and he helped me. So we basically, uh, he worked on getting a app that's out there now that I believe
Yeah.
is part of our migration toolkit
Mm-hmm.
to help migrate away from Mongo over to Axon Server.
Yeah.
There really is not. There's not much easier in the world than that. It just takes time to make it happen when you have 250 million, 300 million of these events
Events
out there
coming in.
to move
Yeah,
over.
exactly.
But overall, the migration away
Mm-hmm.
and over to just running completely on Axon Server for the last remaining service,
Yeah.
or almost the only remaining service that was that we had on Mongo. It was dead simple. I mean, once we
Yeah.
did it, moved over, and as long as we just updated the tracking tokens to be,
Mm-hmm.
hey, head of the stream, it was perfect. So we actually
Nice.
could sit there and we ran it in parallel. The migration was going on while we were running still, because
Yeah.
it was just tailing the old one until we
Nice.
got up to the front. And then, so for all the pain that we had endured, I was so happy that getting off of it
That part of it was so easy.
was so easy.
Yeah.
The one piece of advice I would have for people as they are doing this, though, is, the migration, it wants to have every event in order. And through our like, hey, we need to improve our performance. Let's get our old events out of here. That caused some gaps in our sequences that we had to correct. But once we corrected that, then it just
Easy.
everything was real easy to get over there.
And
So
since you really liked the Grafana dashboard and the metrics with Prometheus, Stefan actually was the person who
yeah,
took care
yep,
of all of that, which is really
yeah.
cool.
I want
And
to
he did
say,
a and he did a little webinar on how folks can use it, which
yep,
is really cool. So I'll include that in our notes for this podcast. But yeah,
sounds good.
definitely lots of amazing things coming in. So yeah, thank you so much for the time, Ben, and I really appreciate you spending the part of your afternoon with me and telling me all about your cool experiences and adventures of the past and current.
Yeah,
What you're doing with all of these wonderful systems, and you work very closely with a lot of clients, and so you have a really good insight on what a lot of people are dealing with and also struggling with when they're migrating from one system to another and
hmm
applying new technologies into some of their legacy systems. So it's a really nice way of uh, having some options and showing a few different things that people can try. So I really appreciate you sharing that knowledge with
yeah.
everybody. Thank
Thanks.
you. Yeah, great having you. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day. And hopefully, we'll talk soon again about some other cool things that you're working on.
Sounds good. All right.
All
Thanks,
right.
Sarah.
Have a good one. Sure.
Bye.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ben. Please join me next time for other amazing topics. Until then, have a great time and happy coding!